will start with what I began making industrial music on. So, many years ago, I was living in another part of Canada, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and there was like a bunch of us that started a band called Adam Hates You, and I was living with a family friend, and he had a computer at the time, and fortunately enough he let me use his computer. This was way back in 1996 or 97, I think. Maybe 95, I can't remember, somewhere around there. And I was allowed to use his computer, and I was using a piece of software called Impulse Tracker. And at the time when I first started, I wasn't using the computer didn't have a sound card, so I was actually using the internal speaker on the computer, and I think it was a old 486 if I'm not mistaken, and I was writing music and listening to it through the internal speaker, and the internal speaker is a mono speaker, and it obviously it sounds like shit, but I was still making music using the internal speaker until I had built up enough of a fund to get a sound card. And friends gave me the software Impulse Tracker. Impulse Tracker was a free basically it was a sequencer, and it had some built-in sounds, but they were generally kind of shitty. And so you had to import your own samples and stuff if you wanted custom sounds and stuff that didn't sound like anybody else. And it didn't have any VSTs or anything. This is before the time of VSTs, and or at least I didn't know about VSTs until much later. So you'd have to import your own samples, and at the time, because Impulse Tracker was a DOS program, so like, you know, you'd have to log out of Windows and then load it up in DOS and use it that way. And so if you wanted to edit one of your samples, you'd have to exit the program, load up Windows, I'm not entirely sure what software I was using to manipulate my samples. It might have been Sound Recorder, but I think it was something else. It was just something very basic included with the Windows 3.1 environment. Yes, it was that old. I can't remember exactly what it was. It might have been Sound Recorder, it might have been something else a little bit more elaborate, I'm not sure. That's what I was using to manipulate samples, and I was using Impulse Tracker to sequence tracks and write my songs. I did get a sound card eventually after I don't know how long of being there, but I did get one eventually. The very first song I wrote, I didn't have a microphone at the time, and I had borrowed, I was using that same computer and Impulse Tracker, and I had borrowed somebody's Tascam Portastudio, their 4-track Tascam Portastudio, and I hooked the audio out into the line-in on the Tascam Portastudio, the audio out from the computer sound card, and basically I hit record on the Tascam, and hit play on Impulse Tracker, and just recorded my song that way. And then after the track was recorded, I used a because I didn't have a microphone. I figured out that these old headphones that I had, I could use them as a microphone. So I was like, when I was singing into the earpiece, and yeah, and it worked, and it came out really distorted and fuck, it was distorted, and it was cool. Yeah, that was the very first song I wrote when I was with that band, and that's kind of where I first started. And then eventually I ended up moving away from Saskatoon. I moved to Calgary, Alberta, and that's when I started creating my first album. And I was living at my parents' at the time, my parents' place, and obviously they let me use their computer. It was a much better computer. They had a sound card and all that kind of stuff. This was in 98 or 99. And I by that point I had purchased my own Tascam Porta Studio, and I'd written all my tracks in Impulse Tracker, and edited my samples and stuff like that using some software in Windows. I'm not sure what it was. I think it might have been the same thing I was using. Actually, it was a little bit more advanced because I think they were using an upgraded version of Windows. I can't remember what version though. Anyway, so had a Tascam Porta Studio, my own Tascam Porta Studio. By that time I had my own microphone, and I was writing my album on the computer using Impulse Tracker. And fortunately enough, my neighbor, her son, was a guitarist. So after everything was done being sequenced and recorded onto tape on the Tascam Porta Studio, he offered to play guitar on the track. So we'd hook up his guitar to the Tascam Porta Studio. He'd play along with tracks, and then I did vocals, and that's how my first album was created. Yeah, I think that's it for gear. And I also had a guitar which I sampled for some of the songs. The other guitarist, the neighbor guitarist, he played stuff over top of what I was doing, and that guitar, my very first guitar, I still have it actually, and I occasionally still use it. I got it in 95 or 96, and I had gotten it from a friend for like $75, and obviously it was used. It was a shitty, it is a shitty like no-name brand of guitar, like a starter kit. It came with an amp and actually it didn't come with an amp. It was just a guitar and picks and stuff like that, and so I sampled that into songs, had the guitarist play over some of my stuff, recorded all that. That was the first album, and yeah, I think that's it for that story. So basically, My suggestion, if you want to make industrial music, if you're just getting into it and you've decided you want to be a musician and you want to do industrial music, some of the gear that you need, and some actually before you even get into gear, I will suggest finding free software. Maybe not cracked software, but definitely free, like Audacity or GarageBand if you already have a MacBook. There's even Buzz Tracker, just Gola Buzz Tracker, which is it's kind of like Impulse Tracker, but rather than you using samples, you actually there's synthesizers and effects and all that kind of stuff built into the software, and it is basically a super powerful tracker program. So basically, if you're on a budget, I would suggest those things. Obviously, you're going to need a computer when you record, so that might be something you have to purchase if you don't already have one. In today's day and age, almost everyone has a computer, at least in Canada and the US. I could be mistaken on that actually, but generally there's computers around us, and you may have to purchase a computer if you don't have one already. But as far as like anything else that you really need, you don't really need anything else. Just free software and your internal sound card on your device, whatever, on your computer, whether that's the built-in sound card or something that you purchase and add to your desktop or whatever. And depending on what you're doing, I'm not going to get into the technical stuff actually, because that's up to you to figure out. If you're feeling that this is your thing and you want to invest in your music career, I would suggest, and you want to do something a little bit more professional sounding, or just sounds better, and you can do more things with. I would suggest getting an audio MIDI interface, like a Motu MK3 Ultralight, which is actually on the more expensive end. But if you want to, if you're trying to do it on a budget, I would suggest Tascam makes some excellent audio MIDI interfaces, as well as I think Behringer does, and Focusrite also does. I think theirs is quite budget friendly. As far as software goes, I would suggest FL Studio or GarageBand, or if you're looking to invest in something that can do more on a Mac, I would suggest Logic Pro, which is $200. FL Studio, I think you can get the basic edition for $200, or something like $200. Audio MIDI interface, software, and maybe a microphone if you intend on doing vocals, and all the additional stuff. As far as microphone, I honestly would suggest an SM58, Shure SM58, because not only is it a good mic, it's more budget friendly, I think, for most musicians. I guess there is some budget friendly, what are they called, condenser mics. I don't know, because I don't have one. I use an SM58. I've used it for all my the majority of my music, most of my albums. But you can get condenser mics that are relatively cheap, and generally they're made for like studio recording and stuff. So the SM58, this thing, you can use it on a live show. Obviously you can use it for vocals and stuff like that. I like it. I know it's not a condenser mic or whatever, but I do like it because it has that grit sound to it, and I don't know. I may eventually get a proper vocal mic. I think it's condenser. I could be mistaken on that. I'm not sure. I'm not like a mic person. I bought what I thought that sounded good, and it's very durable, and yeah. And if most of the software that you use generally has a piano roll and like a MIDI sequencer in them, and generally you can use the computer keyboard to type in your notes. It kind of sucks to do that because you have to switch between the piano roll and then the keyboard function if you're trying to, do different things and use shortcuts and stuff like that to move around in your software faster. But I would suggest, rather than using your keyboard, get a small MIDI controller. I think the Akai it's MPK, the MIDI controller to play notes and stuff like that, and it just makes it easier, and I think it's a better way of expressing your music, because a keyboard you can't really articulate the sound and how hard you've pressed it and the keys and stuff like that. It doesn't work that way with a keyboard. But if you use a MIDI controller, you can you can express yourselves and use different timbres and stuff like that, and that's the basic what you need. You don't really need a lot. I think it would cost you around $500 for all that, except for the computer. If you have to purchase a computer, then it's going to cost more, obviously. And obviously, it depends on what you're looking for computers, and it's the cost is going to vary there. So I will say it is easier today to do music, because like even before my time, like Skinny Puppy or KMFDM or whoever, right? They purchased a lot of expensive, like we're talking like $20,000 synthesizer type stuff, or basically they're as much as a truck or whatever, or a car or something. And they purchased those because at the time that's all they had to use. And if you wanted a more dynamic sound, with textures and stuff, you would have to get multiple synthesizers to make those sounds, or samplers or whatever. And samplers at the time had they still do, but they have, obviously there's a limit to the memory in those things, so especially older ones. And once you run out of memory, you have to you'd have to get another one, kind of thing. Today it's a lot easier for people to do music, because software is cheap. I mean, to start, it's you know, it's easier, it's cheaper, and we kind of have it easy because, you know, like I said, the software is cheap. You know, the audio MIDI interfaces are relatively affordable. The MIDI controllers are cheap. You know, you can get a good microphone for cheap. And back in the old days, before my time, it was, you know, it was much more expensive to get into it. And that's kind of why you see a lot of the older industrial musicians with a lot of the really old gear, and they have a ton of it because they had to invest in that, because if you, like I said, if you wanted more sound, you know, you'd have to purchase more synths, because the synths back then were limited. And nowadays you don't even need a hardware synthesizer, you can do everything with software synthesis. And as far as like samples goes, like if you're intending on using samples in your music productions, you know, it's only limited by the memory in your computer, right? So, yeah, that's kind of how easier it is today. I mean, I think when I was doing it, it was kind of on the edge of like, oh, okay, well, things are becoming a little bit more affordable. Like I have a hardware synthesizer, this thing, and originally when it first came out, I think it was worth around $2,000 or something like that, somewhere around there. And I didn't buy it new, obviously, because I just didn't. And I got mine for $500 from a lady way in Vancouver, I do believe, and I had put an ad out on, this is a little side story, I put an ad on Kijiji, and she had responded to it, and fortunately enough, she had what I was looking for. I was looking for the Yamaha EX7, and she had it, and she was willing to sell it, so I arranged it within a month. I think it was a month or two. No, I think it was a month of posting the ad. No, I think it was a month within posting the ad. I had purchased the synthesizer. And, I think it was January when I had gotten it. Late January or something like that, or February or something. Early February or something like that. I can't remember. It's so long ago now. But yeah. Even in my time, things were becoming more affordable, and you know, obviously it wasn't always like that. So yeah, I think you know, if you're truly dedicated, I would, you know. Oh, there's one piece of software I forgot to mention that is very affordable. Cocos Reaper. You can buy a non-commercial license for $60, and I think you get unlimited updates. So if there's bugs in the software and they fix it and they update their software, you get a free download of the new software. So I'm not sure on that anymore. I do use it for live purposes, but that's a story for another time. Yeah, I think that's it. I will say, if you're dedicated and you know this is going to be a thing for you and something you really want to do, I would suggest getting a hardware synthesizer. Just because it's tactile, you know, there's knobs and stuff, and I personally think I love the sound of a hardware synthesizer, depending on what it is. I find generally the sounds on a hardware synthesizer are a little bit more better than digital or software synthesizers, and it's probably just my bias, but to me it sounds better, and I find that software synthesizers sound a little too digital or something. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. Maybe that's not the right word. It sounds too, I don't know. This synthesizer is a digital synthesizer, so, or virtual analog or digital, but it still sounds better. Something about it just, yeah. I'm sure if you're using soft synths, you can make it sound almost like hardware synthesizer, but I don't know. I can hear the difference. I find that it doesn't sound the same, and yeah, I think that's it. If you like this video, please comment, share, subscribe, and hit the like button. And I might have more stories to tell. We'll see. Did I cover everything? Yeah, I think I did. I think that's good for now. See you later!